Hey friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and today I'm going to take a little bit of a break from my typical content, and I wanted to do probably one of my most requested videos that I really haven't done. This is going to be more of a sit down and talking video, but if you want to have some recipes, you can skip to the end of this video where I'm going to be sharing some snack type foods that are allowed on the diet that I'm going to be discussing in this video. But the first portion of this video is just going to be me talking for a while about how I healed my autoimmune disease through diet and what that diet looks like. So if you're new here, I have Crohn's disease and I've had that for about 20 years. I was diagnosed when I was about 23 years old, and I've been able for the last 10 years to be completely medicine free, and I manage it solely through diet. So if that's something that interests you, why don't you stick around, and I'm going to talk about how you could potentially find some healing for autoimmune conditions using the GAPS diet. So, as I mentioned, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at about the age of 23. I'd been having some concerning symptoms for maybe 9 months to a year before actually going to the doctor and having a scope done and them discovering that I had Crohn's disease. Adam and I were, I believe, engaged to be married at the time, and I got very sick. He was very concerned about me, and he was the one who had pushed me to go seek some medical help for the symptoms that I was experiencing. And I discovered that I had Crohn's disease. I, of course, went through the normal Western model of care for my Crohn's disease. They put me immediately on prednisone to stop the flare that I was having, and then I was put on a maintenance dose of a certain medication. And that medication was very costly, extremely expensive, was not covered by our insurance plan, and cost about $800 a month. So it was not pretty at first. And so what would happen is I would go on the prednisone, and the steroids would take care of the flare that I was having. But then as I tapered off the prednisone, I would last maybe 3 months before another flare would begin. And it got to the point where I was in and out of the hospital, extreme fatigue, extreme anemia. If you know anything about Crohn's disease, it's not very pretty, but I would sometimes have to take a pillow and sleep in the bathroom because the symptoms I was having were so severe, and it was just really bad. So I was just trying to manage the best that I could. Adam and I got married and got pregnant with a honeymoon baby. And midway through that pregnancy, I experienced a very bad flare and had to go on prednisone while I was pregnant. And it was just I was not very happy about that because I didn't know the implications of that for my baby. And that's a whole different topic. But I made it through the pregnancy. It was not a good pregnancy because I was so sick. I ended up with Bell's palsy. I had the Crohn's flare. I was on all sorts of medications. And then Gabriel was born. The medications that I went on during the pregnancy seemed to keep my Crohn's under control until Gabriel was about 6 months old. And I was so sick once again that I was in the hospital. I had to wean him early. And then go on prednisone. At that point, I reached a tipping point, and I was like, I can't continue to keep doing this. I can't continue to get sick every 6 months. I now have a baby to take care of. I would like to have more children in the future, and I know the toll that the pregnancy took on me the last time. I have got to find healing. And so around that time, I sought out help from a chiropractor, and I was very hesitant because I thought it was all woo and all of that. I was very, at that point, eating the standard American diet. I was into mainstream medicine and doing all of the things that they told me to do, but something about being pregnant and having a child and breastfeeding and knowing that I wanted to do more of that in the future started to make me pay more attention to what I was putting in my body and what I wanted to be passed down to my future children during pregnancy and during breastfeeding. So anyways, I go to this chiropractor, and he does several tests, fecal tests, blood tests, and things, and we discovered that I had several pretty severe food intolerances, and it clicked. Once I discovered one of the intolerances was to soy, everything started to make sense. I now understood why every time Adam and I went out to eat sushi, I would get extremely sick, gut-wrenching pains for about 24 hours after we ate the sushi. And a couple times when it happened, I just assumed it was bad fish, and we would just not go to that sushi restaurant anymore and try somewhere else, or I would order different things so that I wasn't getting the fish, so I wouldn't experience the same thing. But it would always happen, and I never put two and two together. And then once I got the diagnosis of the soy intolerance, I realized, oh my goodness, it's the soy. Eating that soy sauce is causing me severe, abdominal distress. And so that was, I guess, the beginning of the journey. My initial doctor that had diagnosed me with Crohn's said, diet doesn't play a role. You can eat whatever you want. This is an autoimmune disease. You are likely, it's genetic. You were born with it. There's no way to cure it. You're just going to have to take the medicines and live the best life you can and eat whatever food you want. And that never made sense to me. For a gastrointestinal issue, I would think that the food that you eat would play a role. But I trusted my doctor. And then when this intolerance came up and I started avoiding those foods and I saw my symptoms starting to disappear, I realized that food does play a role in this. And that was the beginning of my journey. So I went on to have more children, and I just was taking my maintenance medication that, as I mentioned, was about $800 a month. But I wasn't actively having flares anymore because I was avoiding the foods that were triggering the Crohn's flares. They were soy, processed foods like fast food and things like that, things that were extremely greasy. At the time, those were the foods that I was avoiding, and I was having really good results. And so I went on to have David, and I went on to have Grace. And all this time, I'm having to work a job. I worked a part-time job outside of the home 2 or 3 days a week because I had to work that job in order to pay for the $800 a month medication that our insurance wouldn't cover. And I finally reached a point when we had Elizabeth where Gabriel was reaching the age that I wanted to begin homeschooling him, and I knew that working outside of the home was going to make that much harder. Around this time, God just sort of orchestrated this thing to where I got the answers that I needed in order to maintain my health without needing that medication. And this is sort of how it happened. Elizabeth was born, and about a month later, Gabriel began violin lessons. His violin teacher had a child with autism, and it was the type of autism that was very apparent. He walked on his toes. He would bang his head on the wall. He was nonverbal. He was so intelligent, though. This child had memorized entire books, and you could open the pages of the book, and he could recite the entire book from memory. Just very intelligent child, but he just had these behaviors that were a symptom of his autism. Socially, he just wouldn't look people in the aisle, wouldn't communicate with people. She, about a month after Gabriel beginning these violin lessons, started her son on the GAPS diet and was starting to see results. And I, after a few months, began to see the results in him. He was no longer walking on his toes. He would make eye contact with you. He was talking to his mother for the first time in his, life, and it was amazing to me. And so I asked her, what is going on? And she explained to me the GAPS diet, and she said, you know what? I know that you have a son with food allergies, and I know that you have Crohn's disease. Maybe this diet would benefit you. And at that point, I was trying to figure out a way to go off of my Crohn's medicine. I had weaned myself down at that point to the lowest dose of the maintenance medicine possible, but I just was scared to go off of it because I didn't want to have a flare and end up in the hospital and start this whole cycle over again. I had done so well over, at that point it had been 6 years or something, 5 years being flare free. I didn't want to push myself back to that. So I went home, I talked to Adam about it, I prayed about it, I did a lot of research, and I just felt confirmation that this is what I needed to do. And so I told Adam that I was going to quit my Crohn's medication cold turkey. At that point, as I mentioned, I was weaned down to the lowest possible dose, and I was going to quit that, and I was going to go on this GAPS diet. And I didn't do it right away. It took a month to kind of cycle through foods that we had in the house and clean out the cupboards and bring in the foods that I would need for the GAPS diet. And once we did that, we began, both me and my oldest son, Gabriel. He was about 5 or 6 years old at the time, and we decided to do the GAPS diet together. So let me talk a little bit about what the GAPS diet is. So the GAPS diet is very similar to something called the specific carbohydrate diet that had been recommended for people with irritable bowel disease, for many years before the GAPS diet sort of became popular. It's very similar to paleo eating, except paleo has, there are several foods on paleo that are restricted on the GAPS diet. Kind of ketogenic diets are very similar, but GAPS is medically based. The point of it isn't to lose weight. The point of it, actually, a lot of people who go on GAPS diet who have GI issues, irritable bowel disease, who are having a hard time absorbing nutrients might actually begin to put on some weight when they go on it because their digestion is improved and they're actually absorbing the nutrients of what they're eating. But anyways, GAPS diet is more of a medical diet. The point of the diet is to balance your gut microbiome, to heal leaky gut, which the creator of this diet believes that a leaky gut is what leads to many autoimmune diseases and issues like autism, food intolerances, and things like that. There are 2 ways to do the diet. There is something called an intro diet, which you basically do an elimination diet where you stop eating everything and you begin by just eating bone broth and prebiotic, probiotic foods, a probiotic regimen. You're trying to kill off all the bad bacteria in your gut basically by starving it of starch and sugars and things, and repopulate the gut with good bacteria. And so you do this intro diet and you slowly over time add in more foods. And that is what Gabriel and I did when we started the diet. That is different from full GAPS, which is when you're allowed to eat everything on the full GAPS diet, and that is something that is what I'm doing now. But when we started this diet, we did the intro diet, and it is very difficult. It is something that maybe we would have struggled with had we not already had restrictions in our house that we were dealing with. My oldest son has anaphylactic food allergies. We were already used to not being able to eat at a lot of restaurants. We were not able to bring home takeout and eat most processed foods for his sake, and so for us it was much easier to ease into this type of diet. For a child or an adult who's used to being able to eat whatever they want and then go on something so restrictive, it would be extremely challenging. And I think the only reason that I was able to do it was because I wanted healing so bad. At that point, I knew the alternative would be a lifetime of being on and off this medication, and would be no more children likely, because I would have to continue to work to afford the medication. And I wanted to be home with my children, and I wanted to potentially have more children. And that was the motivating factor for me to do this diet and to do it without cheating. You have to want healing. And I think a lot of people that seek out this diet, they've hit rock bottom with their health and they're looking for answers. And it's going to take that kind of motivation in order to stick with it. If this is something that you're just going to try, you're probably not going to stick with it. You have to really want it, because it is very difficult. So when my son and I began the intro diet, this was 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years ago this summer. We were extremely sick for the first 3 weeks of doing the diet, and everything that I had read said that was normal. You experience a die-off of that bad bacteria in your gut, and it makes you very sick. This, coupled with the fact that all you're eating is broth and sauerkraut and maybe some boiled eggs and things like that, it's not pretty. I vomited several times through the night in the first couple weeks. I did not feel good. But once I hit that 3-week mark, everything changed, and everything changed for my son. With his food allergies and all of his issues, he had went his entire first 5 years of life never having normal bowel movements. It was always loose, and he was extremely thin. And then we went on the GAPS diet, and after that 3 weeks, his stool was finally formed, and he put on weight, which everybody around me was so concerned. They're like, he's already thin, and you're restricting his diet so much, he's going to lose too much weight. But in doing this diet, he finally started putting on weight, because his body, now his digestive system was beginning to fix itself, and he was absorbing the food that he was eating, and his body was using it properly to build, you know, everything that he needed. And so that was motivation enough to continue on. And I do want to say, doing this diet with a 5 or 6-year-old is very difficult in most cases. Gabriel was a champ, and I think, like I said, it's because he was used to not being able to eat what most people around him were able to eat, but also he had a parent that was right there with him. So when it felt hard, he could look at me and he could say that, you know, this is hard, and I could say, I know it's hard for me too, and we had each other. And honestly, I think the only way I was able to do it was because I had him doing it with me. So having a partner in your home doing it, I think, is extremely helpful for the person that needs the healing. So we did that intro diet for the first year. So let me talk a little bit about, once we went through the stages of the introduction, what we were and weren't allowed to eat. I'm going to put a link in the description of this video that shows the website that will have the full list of everything. But basically, to sum it up, you can't eat any starches or sugars, anything like that, as I mentioned, because it feeds the bad gut bacteria and you're trying to kill all of that off. The exception is maple syrup. Some people can tolerate raw honey, and if you're doing specific carbohydrate diet, you know, they might allow one of those sweeteners over the other, but we stuck to maple syrup for the most part with some raw honey once we got through that first year of healing. So those are the only sweet things that you'll really be allowed to have. No potatoes, no rice, no grains, no gluten, none of that. All of those starches will just feed the bad bacteria in your gut. Basically, what you are allowed to eat are meats, eggs, broths, vegetables, both raw, cooked, fermented is highly encouraged because it has the probiotic in it. Fruits in moderation, obviously, because fruits do contain sugar, and so those are to be eaten outside of meals as snacks in moderation. You can eat a couple types of beans, like you can eat white navy beans, you can have lima beans, you can have lentils, split peas. This is where my family's love for split pea soup came from, because it's something that tastes a little sweet and very filling, and it's different from just eating meat all the time. That's pretty much it. So if you want to do any kind of baking, you are allowed to have nuts. So you can use almond flour, coconut flour. Basically, that's it. So we just got really good at baking using those types of flours. And it's funny how once you wean yourself off of eating the sugar and the baked goods, something like an apple tastes like candy. It tastes very sweet like candy. And making a baked good out of a little bit of almond flour and maple syrup tastes like the most decadent treat you've ever had. Our taste buds just have to get used to the new normal. And so that is what we did. Let me talk about how that worked for us. So as I mentioned, this was about 10 years ago. Elizabeth was a baby. She was probably about 6 months old when I began the diet. So I was nursing an infant through doing the intro diet, and it did not affect my milk supply. In fact, I think it made my milk higher quality and richer because I was eating more meats, more protein, bone broth, all of these things that were just really nourishing, and so it was better quality milk, and she thrived. She nursed until she was 26 months old, so it did not affect my milk supply at all. And for the first year, full year, then we did that very strict intro diet. After a year, I had Gabriel tested for his food allergies using a blood test, and his results had actually worsened, which was the pattern he was on. His allergy levels doing the RAS blood test were on the rise. The diet did not affect his food allergies. His food allergies are anaphylactic. So people who've done GAPS who have food intolerances have had great results at healing those intolerances. But when it comes to anaphylactic food allergies, our experience was that the diet did not help him. But it did do what I mentioned earlier. It improved his digestion. It healed other gut issues that he was having. And so in the end, I was very grateful that Gabriel did the diet with me. But Gabriel stopped doing the diet, and about maybe 3 or 4 months later, I became pregnant and miscarried that baby. And in the back of my mind was maybe worried that the lack of carbohydrates in my diet could have contributed to that miscarriage. And so I made the decision. I have now at that point been med free for maybe a year and a half. I'd been flare free, no medicines needed, diet was going great, my digestion, no symptoms of my Crohn's, and I thought I'm going to slowly introduce a few carbohydrates that I feel like will be safe to see if that will prevent any further miscarriages. And so I added potatoes and rice, and I think that was about it. Eventually I added corn chips just because the family was snacking on them, and I lost self-control and decided I wanted some too. And then that spiraled into then allowing myself to eat things like sweet corn and corn tortillas, that, you know, homemade tortillas and things like that. And that is sort of the diet then that I kept from that point on. And I went on to have 3 more children without any miscarriages in the mix. So obviously my body was getting what it needed. I was able to nurse all of those babies through doing that modified GAPS diet, and it was just fine. Oddly enough, I had Benjamin, my 7th baby, was still doing the GAPS diet. It had been, at that point, 8 years of doing the GAPS diet. And at some point, I got weak during his pregnancy and began eating sugar for the very first time in 8 years, and had refined white sugar. I gained weight like I have never gained weight in a pregnancy, and I couldn't take the weight off after I had him, and then went on to have 3 miscarriages after Benjamin. Could be due to my age, could be due to the fact that my body now suddenly didn't like this new diet that I was on, adding the sugar, or maybe I was starting to cause damage to my system. So anyways, I'm back on GAPS. We cut out the sugar, and that is what I'm doing now. That's the long story. Very rambly, but that tells you the whole story. So to answer some questions about it, I guess, the whole family did not do this diet with us when I did it with Gabriel. The rest of them were still eating their gluten and their sugar and all of that. And I've mentioned before in a lot of my content about meal planning that how I plan meals typically tends to be I have a protein source, I have a vegetable, I'll have a starch, and then maybe we'll have a dessert. And so that worked out. We got into the habit of doing that because Gabriel and I could eat as much of the protein source and the vegetable as we wanted, and then the rest of the family could eat the starch and the dessert. And so then I wasn't having to cook 2 separate dinners for us. It was all one dinner, and we all could eat what, was safe for us out of the selections that were there. So that's what worked for us as a large family, with some of us doing the diet. I will say that this diet has blessed me in many ways. As I mentioned, I'm now able to stay at home with my children because of this diet. It's been 10 years now, and I'm forever grateful that I had these 10 years with my children. Had I not went on this diet, I likely wouldn't have had a lot of my younger children because I would have had to continue working and just to afford the medication. And who knows, had I not gotten it under control through diet, who knows what my health would look like today. But I have had 0 flares, 0 signs of Crohn's disease in, the last 10 years. Whenever I will notice, though, if I have a time where I'm extremely emotional, like the loss of a loved one, and I cry really hard or something like that, I will begin to feel what is called Crohn'sy. If I am overexert myself and don't get enough sleep, which is something I have to really watch out for when I have a newborn baby, I will start to feel a little Crohn'sy. And when I do, when I start to get that feeling, and what it feels like is like my immune system crashing, like that. People who have an autoimmune disease will understand what this feels like. It's like completely depleted, and you can feel your immune system just tanking. And if you don't do something about it and catch it early on, it will end up with you sick or in a flare or whatever. And so when I first start to feel that feeling coming on, I go back to the intro diet, and I'll take a week of just doing broth and making sure I'm getting enough probiotic in my food, or taking a supplemental probiotic, And usually just a week of cleaning up my diet and really pumping that, the intro diet foods will nip it in the bud, and then I won't, enter a flare. So that has happened a couple times over the last 10 years, but it has never reached the point where I needed medication or anything like that. So anyways, I share this because I hope it blesses somebody else. The only reason I would have found out about this and done this is because somebody who was found healing for her son shared it with me, and then I was able to heal myself. And so now I want to pay that forward. And if you're out there and you're struggling, or your child is struggling with something like autism or ADD or ADHD, irritable bowel disease, any other kind of autoimmune condition, if you've been diagnosed with a candida overgrowth in your body, something like that, this is a diet that could really help you. It was life-changing for me, so hopefully the information blesses you. Now, on to the recipes. So the recipes that I want to share with you are some of my tried and true staple snack recipes that I have used over the last 10 years, because that is the one part of this diet that I think is hard, is that most snack foods are starches. It's potato chips, it's pretzels, it's cookies, it's all sorts of things that you can't eat if you're doing the GAPS diet. And there's only so many hard-boiled eggs or apples or what a banana that you want to eat. And it just, you want to have something different. And so I would use these snacks that I'm going to show you as a way to feel like I could still enjoy fun treats, something that tasted sweet or tasted crunchy or was fun. So I'm going to go ahead and share those, and then I'll come back and talk to you a little more. I shared my favorite breakfast in a recent video and just thought I would share it again here, but sometimes you just get sick of having scrambled eggs and protein for breakfast and you want something sweet. So I make squash pancakes, equal parts of pureed squash, nut butter, and eggs, and mix that together and put it in the waffle iron or make pancakes out of it, and it's something sweet that kind of breaks up the day and gives you a special breakfast. Here is something when I'm craving like a candy or a chocolate. This is something that I will make. This is an unsweetened chocolate baking bar. You have to use a sugar-free chocolate. So I get these unsweetened baking chocolate bars. We're going to sweeten it with maple syrup. We are going to add some kind of nut butter. I'm using sunflower seed butter. You would want to use something that is unsweetened in order to make these, if you wanted to make it GAPS legal, I guess. And we're going to add some cashew pieces for nuts in it. You could add almonds, you could add shredded coconut, you could add dried fruit, whatever you wanted in your little chocolates. And the first thing we need to do is melt down the chocolate in a double boiler. And I just add the maple syrup directly to this chocolate and mix it together as it's melting. And then we are going to take our little muffin tin and use these little mini baking cups. And we're going to make essentially what are like little GAPS friendly Reese's cups. So we put our liners in, and then we're going to put a layer of melted chocolate on the bottom. And it's not going to be perfect. You just kind of have to fill the little cup, and then I take a spoon and just smash it down. You want to try to cover as much of the bottom of that muffin cup as you can with your melted chocolate so that the bottom of your little cup will be solid. And then we take our nut butter and we just scoop out a little bit of that in the center of each of the cups. And then we add our nuts or our fruit or whatever else we want to have in our chocolates. And then we're going to cover the top with another layer of the melted chocolate. Once we get that done, we're going to try to flatten them out as best as we can and put them in the fridge so that that melted chocolate cools. And then we're going to have little chocolate treats. And these are refined sugar-free, so they're safe for GAPS, and it really is a huge treat when you're on this diet to have something that feels like a candy. And so especially when my son was doing this diet with me, it was important that I would give him fun little treats on special occasions. I try not to make these too often for myself because I don't need all the extra candy and calories, but it's definitely appreciated with the children when they do GAPS with you. And so if I make a big batch, I have all of the children to share in that with me, so that it leaves me a couple and they eat the majority of them. So I'm not eating an entire tray of chocolates myself. But that's one of my absolute favorite treats. Why don't I show you another one that I have shared many times before, and it is homemade Jello. So to make this, I just take some home canned fruit juice and I add pastured beef gelatin to it, and then we put it in the fridge and it solidifies. When my son was doing GAPS with me, I would buy special little silicone molds and I would make him little gummies out of the gelatin and fruit juice. So it felt like he was getting a fruit snack that was safe for him because there was no sugar in it. And this is just a fun treat to have in the middle of the day. And there's so much gelatin in that it's actually beneficial for you when you're trying to create a healthy gut and build up your gut during the GAPS diet. All right, dates are another thing that are safe to have on GAPS, and they're very sweet and they make tasty treats. We're using the dates and we're going to use nuts here, any combination of nuts, about 2 cups worth. And we're going to add cinnamon and we're going to add applesauce. I'm going to make kind of an apple Larabar. Larabars are a GAPS safe treat, but when you buy them in the store, they're very expensive. So I try to make a homemade version. I'm taking 16 pitted dates here, and I just love making Larabars. You can make any combination of fruit flavors to make various types of these Larabars, but we're going to add a tablespoon of cinnamon, a cup of applesauce, and then 2 cups of any type of nut mixture. You could use almonds, cashews, whatever you want. And then we put it in the blender, mash it down and kind of flatten it like this, and then we can cut it into shapes. And no need to bake it or anything like that. We're going to store them in the fridge, and the fridge will harden them into these little bars that taste exactly like a Larabar. And they taste really good. So if I need a snack, we're going on a picnic or something like that, and I can't have the snacks I pack for the children, I'll make something like this and bring it along. And it just feels like a decadent treat, like a store-bought Larabar, but for a fraction of the price. And now we're going to make one of my favorite cake-like treats. I put 3 bananas, 5 eggs, about a cup of coconut oil, some vanilla extract, and then maybe about 3/4 a cup of maple syrup, or you could use honey. And we just put all of that into the bowl. I'm going to add a little bit of shredded coconut just to kind of give a little texture in the cake. And then all we have to do is puree this up. You could do it in the blender if you want. I'm just going to mash the bananas. When you do use bananas on the GAPS diet, you want to make sure that they are brown bananas, because the sugars kind of change in the banana as the peel of it browns. And so you want to have brown spots on your peels before you use those bananas. Anyways, we get this all mixed together, put it in the oven on 300 degrees for about 45 minutes or so. And when you're done, you have something that feels like a cake, but it is grain-free and sugar-free and safe for you to consume while you're on the GAPS diet. So this was a favorite when my son was little. We'd make it sometimes for breakfast as a treat, or bring it with us when we were going somewhere where we couldn't eat the cake. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed those recipes. If you're doing GAPS, hopefully there's something there that you can try. If you want to see more GAPS content, I can maybe do some videos on meals. But to be honest, our meals look very similar to what I usually show you when I'm doing GAPS. Like I said, I just eat the protein and the vegetable of what I'm making, and the rest of the family will eat the baked goods and the desserts and whatever starch or potato or something like that we're having. So meals, I don't make special GAPS friendly meals. I just eat meat and vegetables and whole foods that I'm allowed to eat on my diet. So the snacks are the special things that make me feel like there's some fun in my world of food, I guess. So, all right, if you have any questions about the GAPS diet, you can leave it in the comments below. I just hope that this information can bless somebody out there who needs, who is searching for a way to heal their body naturally. I know how discouraging it is to have a doctor tell you there is no cure for this disease. You're going to live with this for the rest of your life. There's nothing you can do through diet to change this or cure this. Well, they told me that, and here I am now, 10 years later, 10 years off of medication, 10 years flare-free, and hopefully you can find the same for yourself. So, all right, friends, that's it for this week. Next week I'll be back with more of my regular content. I'm hoping to get in the garden this weekend and get some things planted. I haven't been out there yet, and life is just, I just haven't had a chance. So this weekend, Adam will be home, and I'm going to get out there and get some things planted, and I will definitely share that with you next week. All right. Hope you have a great week, friends. Bye.